A weirdly common problem in Final Fantasy XIV, possibly especially because of the age of the game, combined with the various changes the game has got over the years, is that some players will claim that something is true without checking whether it actually is. Either because they assumed it is the way they think without ever checking, or because it was like that at some point. Welcome to Final Fantasy XIV Mythbusters, where I and my friends highlight the odd claims and misconceptions players make and test them to see whether they are true or not, while also explaining how you can test these things yourself so you can learn how to science stuff in Final Fantasy XIV. Number 1. How does dualcast even work? Red Mage's dualcast is an incredibly weird effect, despite how relatively straightforward it really should be, right? You cast a spell, the next one is instant. Bam, done. Right? Except it doesn't entirely work like that. The tooltip itself states that it is granted upon casting any spell with a cast time, and that it makes your next spell require no time to cast. It also states that the effect is cancelled upon execution of any action other than an ability. Based on this precise description, dualcast should end even if you use a spell that is inherently instant, like Grand Impact. Yet this does not end dualcast. Dualcast should technically also end if you cast a spell that is instant due to other factors like acceleration. However, it turns out acceleration takes priority over dualcast where applicable. This priority also suggests that dualcast does not even recognize that a spell was cast at all. The description also suggests that using any weapon skill would break it, and this is true of course. And since the description specifically notes that it is broken by any action that is not an ability, this also indirectly explains why it is broken by various other means. Using Sprint, which is not an ability, will break dualcast. Teleport not only does not benefit from the instant casting effect, as teleport is not a spell, but also will break dualcast if you teleport somewhere, as teleport is not an ability. Using a mount breaks it, using an item breaks it. To return to the example with acceleration and Grand Impact, it highlights that there is a priority order in which instant casting effect goes first, as can also be observed on Black Mages with triple cast and swift cast. Effects that allow you to skip the cast time of your next spell ignore spells that are instant anyway, like Grand Impact or Xenoglossy, and will simply wait for the next one. After that, super specific instant casting effects like acceleration, we don't have many of those, take priority if you use a spell that specifically they can interact with. After that, dualcast takes priority over swiftcast, and then in the case of Black Mage, swiftcast takes priority over triplecast. Usually, this does not come up very much, as most of the time, casters are not in such a hurry to get all their instant casts out the door that they need to weave both in at the same time. However, this kind of interaction is mildly significant for red mages at present, both because it can be advantageous for using swiftcast closer to on cooldown at times, but also because this order of operations feature is actively used in the red mage opener, where the latter half of the very long standard opener uses acceleration and then casts the fire, and then Grand Impact while holding both acceleration and dualcast. Another little bonus fact is that both sides of dualcast do not outright name drop red mage spells, meaning that indeed any spell would interact with both parts. So in niche cases, content that offers extra spells with cast times, a red mage could actively interact with this option more easily with dualcast. The free raise spell from variant dungeons, for instance, come to mind. Number 2. Pet potency is not a thing! Revisited. False, by the way. In Final Fantasy XIV, not only is what is considered a pet very vague, but how pets function is not super well explained. It's not explained. To put it simply, pets base their stat total on yours mostly, and they scale in real time with your stat total. However, they scale differently with those stats than you do. they also don't benefit from some effects that you do benefit from. A notable example of this is the party bonus. When in a party, you get an additive 1% bonus to your attributes for each unique role represented between tank, healer, melee, physical ranged, and magical ranged represented in your party. Meaning, if you have one of each role, you get 5%. The common observation is that some things do close enough to the same output as the player that it isn't clear that it is a pet at all, or it doesn't look, smell, or meow like a pet, so it would be shocking if it was a pet. Of what remains, the few obvious pets can easily lead you to make the wrong conclusions. Notably, I've said myself in the past that pet potency typically fluctuates at around 1/10 less to 1/6 less output than the owner, but this isn't entirely right. A group of players went into detail testing all of the pets in Final Fantasy XIV to see how they actually stack up to their owners. I had trouble finding those to credit, but I can say that I did not do this research myself, but let's take a look at it. Starting with the ones that are more obviously pets, I demonstrated back in Endwalker that Dark Knight's Living Shadow is actually stronger than their owner. This is due to two reasons. The first one is that Living Shadow turns out to scale very closely to the same as the actual Dark Knight, meaning Living Shadow is likely to do the same damage as the Dark Knight, or very close to, except it will lack party bonus. The second reason is that Living Shadow does not suffer from the minus 20% damage output all tanks still have. I demonstrated this back in Endwalker as well. As such, Living Shadow, at present, does somewhere in the ballpark of 16 to 22% more damage than the actual Dark Knight per potency. Next, summoners have for a long time dealt with weirdly low outputs from their pets compared to what you would have expected. This is because summoner pets do somewhere in the ballpark of 80 to 84% of the damage of the summoner per potency, which happens to be exactly 1/2 of where my estimate of about 1/6 less than the owner originated from. This is while taking into account that the level 94 trait that is supposed to boost some of these potencies is bugged. I explain this in a separate video. Then we have Scholar's Ears, whose heals hang at around 91 to 95% of the performance of the Scholar themselves, which is a lot better, relatively speaking. This also represents the other half of my saying 10th less than the owner. Eos also suffers from a similar bug as Summoner at the time of this video. Both are expected to be fixed in 7.1. Similar to Scholar, Machinist Automaton Queen and Rook Autoturret also do 91 to 95%. And now we move on to the weird ones. Ninja's Bunshin, and so also Phantom Kamaitachi, is known to be a pet for whatever reason, and it swings at around 92 to 97% of the ninja's performance. White Mage's Liturgy of the Bell, or Lilybell, first of all, is a pet, but second of all, could be a lot harder to track as its performance without party bonus is actually 101% of the White Mage's own output, and 96% with full party bonus. So it is close enough that it looks like variance and nothing more. And finally, for the wackiest of them all, Astrologian's Earthly Star. There are two separate oddities with this one. The first is, of course, that Earthly Star is a pet, and its scaling is 98 to 103% of the Astrologian itself. The second one is that apparently the potencies on the tooltip are completely off, and Earthly Star's real potencies are approximately 290 base damage potency rather than 205, 437 boosted damage potency rather than 310, 762% base cure potency rather than 540, and about 1015 boosted cure potency rather than 720. It should come as no surprise that these things have led Earthly Star to seem completely impossible to understand for ages. Another interesting little detail is that specifically Scholar and Summoner's Maim and Mend traits also affect their pets, where White Mage and Astrologian's Maim and Mend don't mention pets, which is why Earthly Star has this massive potency increase, yet somehow it sort of lines up anyway. Another little detail about pets is also that a pet scales in real time with their owner, where a placed AoE like Salted Earth snapshots the owner's state on placement. Number 3. Does cure potency and damage potency scale equally? False. You'd think that if something says 100 potency, it means 100 potency, right? Especially if everything on your stat sheet suggests they should be the same, right? To demonstrate what I'm talking about here, I have 3 tests. 1. Paladin's Clemency is 1000 cure potency, Confiteor, Blade of Valor, and Blade of Honor are all 1000 damage potency. 2. Red Mage's Jolt is 360 potency, and Valkyr is 350 potency, so while not equal, this can still work if the difference is significant. 3. Sage's Phlegma and Psyche are both 600 damage potency, and Ryuholi is 600 cure potency. A bonus test here is also Dyscrasia and Cardia, as they are both 170 potency. Just to clarify some things before we start on this, I've demonstrated in past Mythbuster videos that Determination affects all healing done. Even if the tooltip says healing spells, it turns out the English tooltip is just really misleading. Tenacity also increases all healing done, not received, even if that would maybe make more sense for a tank stat. Both of these stats also impact damage output just as well as they impact healing output, so these stats can be ignored as long as they don't get changed between tests. Finally, speed stats increase the healing and damage and healing over time effects as an additional multiplier. So damage over time and healing over time cannot be compared to direct damage or healing for this test. For the first test, in my current tank gear, my Clemency heals for between 36 and 37,000 when cast on myself for 1000 potency. It can crit for about 58 to 59,000 as well. We can demonstrate that Clemency scales with attack power and not healing magic or attack magic potency by removing equipment, massively reducing attack power while leaving the other 2 unaffected, and noting that the healing drops massively too. On the opposite end, Confiteor, Blade of Valor, and Blade of Honor tend to hit for 38 to 40,000 damage, and crits for 61 to 65,000 damage. That's a relatively small difference, however, it is worth noting that tanks are, as previously mentioned, known to have a baked-in minus 20% to damage done that tends to make their attack potency somewhat misleading. Whether this affects healing as well, I don't know yet. However, should the other tests demonstrate a significantly bigger difference in power, then it is likely that this small difference on tanks is due to this built-in damage loss. For the second test, it is somewhat significant to remember that Jolt does about 3% more potency than Valkyr. However, my Jolts average over 21,000 damage, while Valkyr averages just above 16,000 healing. Similar to Paladin, we can again demonstrate that Valkyr scales with attack magic potency by removing gear that grants this stat while leaving healing magic potency unchanged. To be clear, this means Jolt does about 28% more damage per potency than Valkyr's healing, once we account for the about 3% power difference. If we, say, chopped off 20% of the damage of Jolt, then the power difference between Jolt and Valkyr would be a lot more comparable to Clemency and the Blades on Paladin, suggesting that healing potency is unaffected by the tank damage loss. Also, just to be clear, on Red Mage, Maim and Mend also increases healing done. For the third test, Sage's Ryuholi swings at around 26 to 27,000 healing per cast. Meanwhile, Phlegma and Psyche hits for 34 to 36,000, which is, again, close to a third more. Just to add to this for the bonus test, Dyscrasia swings at around 10,000, where Cardia only heals for closer to 7,500. Again, Dyscrasia is about 33% stronger. In other words, it doesn't actually matter what role you are, you will do visibly more damage per potency than healing, for some reason. This is particularly clear on non-tanks, as the difference can easily be over 25%. There is of course the possibility that different jobs have slightly different scaling between these, but I do think the sheer magnitude of difference we can observe here is telling. So, have you seen some strange things in Final Fantasy XIV, or heard some absurd claim in the game that you would like to have an explanation for, or see tested or demonstrated? Then please let me know about it in the comments. If you feel I overlooked something in my tests, I would also love to hear about this. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Endwalker, Paladin's Requiescat increased both magic damage and healing done for 5 casts, but it only did so if Requiescat was cast with at least 80% of your MP available for some reason. Notably, this meant Clemency would also heal for 50% more during this effect, where currently the effect only makes Clemency instant.